Hello, this is Dr. Kevin Garrison. I'm suffering with a cold right now, so I apologize if my voice sounds a little low, a little bit crackly. This is the fifth in a series of lectures on writing and technology, the fifth of 8 videos. And so let's dive right into it here. We've talked about in the first 4 lectures, they're pretty straightforward, that if you to summarize it, that writing and technology are important. Pretty straightforward thesis. If anybody asks you what this class is about, you say, well, I'm learning about how important writing and technology are. That's a very simplified understanding of it, but technology has a marked impact on the way that we are and the way that we think. It's got a substantive impact, and writing also has the same thing because writing is a form of technology. So let's dive forward with the last of these sort of abstract ideas we've been grappling with, and starting next week we'll grapple with some more practical questions. So thesis 5 for today is this idea of the medium as the message. This is sort of the master key. We like visual metaphors. The master key for helping us understand how everything that we've been talking about up to this point in the semester ties together and works together. This phrase was made famous by Marshall McLuhan in the 60s. His book was actually titled The Medium is the Massage, as I mentioned in another lecture. It was a misprint. It was a typographical mistake from the printer that McLuhan saw and fell in love with, and he thought, what a great little play on words. The medium is not the message, but it's almost the message. And plus, if you split the word in two, it's not only here the mess and the age, so the medium is the mess age, but you turn it into massage, then the medium is the mass age, as well as the massage, as well as the message, as well as the message. There's a lot of play on words for McLuhan. Media ecology specifically has adopted this idea as their own, and it's sort of, as I said a second ago, this sort of master key for helping us understand how all things work together. If you're a big fan of big picture theories like I am, that sort of cover and take a huge amount of data and consolidate it so that you can just compartmentalize one small little section in your brain for efficiency's sake, that makes sense of a lot of data, just remember this term, the medium, or this phrase, the medium is the message. So all the people we grappled with up to this point sort of fall into this the tradition, Jacques Ellul, as we've read already, Walter Ong, which we read Orality and Literacy. I referenced Elizabeth Eisenstein and her work a few weeks ago. Eric Havelock and Harold Innes were also referenced by McLuhan and Ong. So they're sort of all closely connected here. And the big one that we'll be reading later on this semester is Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, which has some severe impacts on the way that we think of education. Let's see if we can understand how this idea works. So the medium is the message. Essentially what they're saying is, what McLuhan's saying is that the packaging is more important than the present. If you've ever gone to a Christmas tree on Christmas morning and you see all the packages underneath the tree, if you ask people which is more important, the moment before you open all the presents or the moment after, a lot of people would say that it's the moment before. It's all the excitement, the foreplay, the build-up that lead to that moment where you have an orgy and you're just ripping into all the packaging, tearing off all the paper. Oh, I got what I wanted, oh crap, I got another sweater kind of thing. So for McLuhan, the packaging is far more important than the present. And if you were like me growing up, my sisters and I would always spend a huge amount of time on Christmas morning just killing ourselves by looking around the corner. Oh, what's under the tree? Oh wait, is that mine? It's big. I like that. And then of course once you've opened it up, it's just more stuff. I've got plenty of stuff, but now I have more stuff. But it was the styling that was more important. And so for the medium is the message, the medium is more important than the message, the form is more important than the content, style is more important than substance, and the how is more important than the what. So essentially we're dealing with this big question of rhetoric, the presentation of information. The presentation is far more important than the actual content of that information. Several quick examples to sort of illustrate this. If you say, I hate you, depending on how you say it, go back here, the how versus the what, how you say it has a marked impact on how people interpret. So if you're looking at somebody and they're angry and they've been yelling at each other and say, I hate you, and they're very vocal about that, then they're going to take that literally, and they're going to think that you don't like them, and you're not going to be friends anymore, or lovers, or whatever the case may be. But you can say it in a very sardonic way. You can say, I hate you. It has this more of a joking feel to it, where it's like, you have done something so amazing that I am in awe of you, and I hate you only insofar that I wish I could be you. So I actually have hero worship, and so I don't actually hate you, I love you and I want to be you. So you can say it in such a way that the how has a marked impact on how we interpret that information. Another example, PowerPoint, they did a study a few years ago that showed that if you provide the same information to students with and without a PowerPoint, unsurprisingly, students remember the information better if they did not have the PowerPoint. And this goes against our intuition. You would think that students who hear a presentation and see that information will recall that information better, but they don't. There's about a 15% reduction of learning with the presence of the PowerPoint. And so how you present the information then dictates what people recall later. And of course, anybody who's thought about it for any period of time, especially in communications and mass media, death by PowerPoint is a very real phenomenon. And you can bore people to death very quickly by just putting huge amounts of text in a PowerPoint and reading to them. I'll give you one final example on this slide from my experience. My border collie, this is a picture of my border collie, his name is Kent, when he was a puppy. I trained him to seek out my wife, Catherine, so I would say, go find mommy. And he would he'd instantly just turn tail and find and sniff her out and go look for her. You could play hide and go seek with him, that kind of thing. But one day, I did something different. I put a little sticky note, very simple like this, and I wrote, I love you, on a sticky note. I stuck it on Ken's collar, and I said, go find mommy. He walked into the room, and a few minutes later, here comes Catherine, my wife, and she's bawling her eyes out. And these are happy tears, but she's crying because it's like, wow, this is the most romantic gesture that my husband ever did. It was, to be quite honest, it was one of those goofy moments where I was like, hey, I can put this stupid skill of telling my border collie to go find somebody to cool you. The thing is, I tell my wife and my daughter every day that I love them, and I do this as a matter of principle because not only do I think that we need to tell people, that we also need to show people via our actions. And so the two things together have stronger weight than the one by themselves. And so I tell them frequently that I love them every time I leave for the office in the morning. But they don't cry when I tell them that. And so when you provide a different medium for the message, it has a marked impact on the way that people interpret or utilize that information. So the medium is more important than even the message, because the message hasn't changed. I've said I love you hundreds of times to my wife in our 10-year career. But she doesn't cry most of the time when I say that. One final example, a student stopped by the other day and was really excited because she's going on this spiritual journey. She spent a number of years in the Protestant religion, reading scriptures and memorizing scriptures. And she was getting frustrated because she thought that her and her colleagues and her friends were getting bogged down in textual analysis that wasn't very fruitful or productive. So that, for instance, they would take a verse and they would say something like, and God said, let there be a vault between the water to separate water from water. And they would get bogged down. And what does that mean? What is the importance of that verse? What is the relative importance of that verse versus other verses, etc.? And then she found what's called the Reader's Bible. And she stopped by my office earlier this semester. And she was all excited about this. And she said, look what I found. It's the Reader's Bible. And they take out all of the verses. There's no more numbers. And so that I read this as more of a prose passage as opposed to a fragmented verse-by-verse passage. And for her, it's sort of this revolutionary moment, because now she's seeing the Bible from a big picture perspective as opposed to the small picture perspective that's being forced on her by, again, the medium. And so something very small, just changing whether or not you have numbers attached to the verses, has a marked impact on the meaning of the message. So again, I don't want to over-trivialize it, but this is still small fry. These are small beans. So great, the medium is the message. The medium has a market impact in the message. A 5-year-old kid knows this when they're learning about sarcasm and the way that language works. So we know this. This isn't all that radical. We saw last week, though, that it is somewhat radical, that when you start to change the medium constantly or consistently, it has a market impact on civilization entirely. And so for Walter Long and morality and literacy, when you start changing the medium consistently from morality to literacy, it changes everything about the way that we think. And we used a few examples last week in terms of deductive logic versus inductive logic, and abstract thinking versus situational thinking. Let's give one more example of how this works, and how it works on a big picture scale so that we can sort of tie everything together. We're not just talking about writing, we're not just talking about mediums, we're not just talking about technologies, but we're uniting them all together into this big framework here. And we're doing that with the book by Robert Logan, The Alphabet Effect. He argues that writing is sort of the foundation for all of Western civilization. It didn't create it, but it allowed for it to happen. So it's specific allowances are created through the alphabet. Let's examine how that works here. He doesn't do a very good job of doing that in a visual sense. So if you go back to the first writing system, the Sumerian writing system, the way that it developed is a fascinating story, and it starts with this. They had little tokens that represented agricultural products. They were agricultural people, and so they had a lot of agricultural products, and they were trying to organize those agricultural products into a way of understanding who had what in terms of ownership. The problem. So if you'll notice this little icon down here, it looks sort of like an ox head, or a goat's head, or a sheep's head, or a cow's head. It's supposed to represent a cow. It's got the face, and it's got the horns coming down off of it. Now, if you had a little small token, about that big, that looked like that it indicated that you owned one cow. Or if you had a little circle with a cross on it, it indicated that you had one sheep. So these were icons that, or little tokens that represented something external to themselves. So Logan calls these visual metaphors, which makes sense. A metaphor is a representation of something else. So it stands in the place of something else, and so in this case, this icon or this token stands in the place of the real thing. That means that I have a cow, this means that I have a sheep, etc. Now, it's interesting in terms of the development of writing is that this is not a writing system to have a token. It just means that I have a memory aid device that tells me how many cows I own because I can keep them. But they're easy to lose, and they're pretty small, so Sumerians developed a couple of remedial technologies. One was to poke holes in them and carry them around in necklaces, and the other was to stick them in clay envelopes, much like we stick money in wallets or money in coin purses to keep our money safe. But they stuck them in little bitty clay balls called envelopes, and they would stick their icon or their tokens inside, wrap the clay ball around it, fire the ball, and then it was a way of storing their property abstractly in a small little container. I have however many tokens are in here, which represent how many products or properties that I own outside of it. Of course, it's not very helpful. It's helpful in terms of keeping things all in a centralized location, but it's not helpful for knowing what you own. Because there's a problem with that. Every time you want to find out how many cows you own, you got to break the ball and you got to pull out all the tokens and count them. So what they started doing, what isolated group did, they started imprinting those tokens on the outside of the clay before they fired them. It's a fantastically smart idea. Now I don't have to break open the clay ball to find out what I actually own. I can just see it represented on the outside of the ball. But then this begs the obvious question, what the heck do I need the tokens for? If all I have to do is take a token and I have to impress it in the clay and it represents an idea of what I own, then I no longer need the actual tokens and I don't need the clay balls, and so it's all a very inefficient process. So let me just take a little stylus, let me imprint that into the clay, and that indicates property ownership. This is the foundation of writing, the first attempt at a writing system. it's an ideographic system, meaning that it represents ideas. It doesn't represent words. It represents bigger picture thoughts. Now, if we're talking about the evolution of writing systems, if the foundation is an ideographic system, then we'll see how, here in a second, the process becomes much less concrete and much more abstract as we move from an ideographic system to at least our modern-day Roman alphabetical system. It works like this. We get much more efficiency in the transfer of information in the following process. An ideographic system just simply represents an idea, and there's a lot of subjectivity and interpretation involved in that. This is not an ideographic system. This is a cave painting, but it serves as a good example of an ideographic system. This represents an idea. We don't know what that idea is because we can't look into the head of the person who drew that picture. But it's got a lot of details and it's very concrete. I can see that, and it looks like a buffalo. It looks like a bison. When you get into a logographic writing system, then these icons, or these symbols, start to represent words as opposed to ideas. Obviously, the word logos indicates words, so we're talking about a word-based system in terms of writing. So if we take that previous example of a cow and we turn it here into an ox head, which is the foundation for the letter A, which we all use today, then we've shifted to a logographic way of thinking, or a logographic way of writing. So that the ox head now represents a word. This represents a cow, the word cow specifically. So if I have another word for 3, then I can combine those two together, and I would say 3 cows, and it indicates much more specific about what I'm trying to argue for, as opposed to here, which is much more, it's concrete, yet it's very abstract in terms of its interpretation. It's a concrete image, but abstract in terms of the information being presented. When you get to a syllabary, then something remarkable happens, and this is a fascinating idea, so don't tune me out here. Grab onto this idea of the rebus principle, which works in the following way. It takes a word-based system and turns it into a sound-based system. If you have a logographic system of writing, you have a icon that represents every word in the language. In modern-day English, that would be impossible because we have well over 1 million words in the English language. The Oxford English Dictionary has over 500,000 entries. There's a lot of words. If you were trying to learn how to write all of that, that would take you a long time to memorize 500,000 to 1 million entries in terms of the logographic system. Plus, it's inefficient. So a more efficient way of memorizing words, specifically, is to turn it into its sound content as opposed to its visual content. Now, what does that mean? Well, in a syllabary, we turn the words into syllables, and it works like this. If you look at this here, this icon looks like an eye, this looks like the ocean, and this looks like a duck's head. It's supposed to. It's rudimentary drawing, but that's what it's supposed to look like. Now, because there's homonyms in languages, words that sound the same but don't mean the same thing, we can turn this into what's called the rebus principle. So this eye here represents both the eyeball, but it also now represents the word I, which refers to myself, I. Same thing here. This is the sea, the ocean, but I can also represent it as the word sea, S-E-E. And the same thing with the bill. This is supposed to be a bill of a duck's head, but it can also represent the person, thing, bill. So if you put that together in terms of the syllables, then it says I saw or I see bill. Pretty fascinating way of now being a lot more efficient in terms of our writing system. We don't have to memorize thousands or potentially millions of different logographs. Instead, we just memorize a few syllables and represent them through their content here. But that's still even it's even more efficient to go to an alphabetical system. An alphabet can between 20 and 40 characters represent all of specifically the phonemes, which are even a smaller level of sound as opposed to the abstract syllables. So when I say I see Bill here, we're representing this in terms of the English language, and the alphabet is I, S, E, E, C, B-I-L-L, Bill. So we're representing all the individual sounds within that language by an alphabetical system. So we're getting from a very concrete to a very abstract way of thinking and writing. This has no content in terms of what we would see or understand unless you have a very in-depth knowledge of how phonetics work within that language, like we all do, all of us who are literate anyway. This is much more easy to grasp. My daughter, you show her a picture of this, she would immediately recognize that as some sort of an animal. She's not going to see that and understand anything about it. So it's a move from thinking concretely to a move to thinking much more abstractly. Robert Logan's fundamental thesis is that this shift right here, moving from an ideographic to a logographic to a syllabary to an alphabetical way of thinking or a way of writing, also impacted the way that we think. And here's an example of how that works. I'm going to choose chapter, I believe, 7 from his book, where he talks about the Hebrew people. Now, let me ask you a simple question. How do you represent a God that you cannot see? How do you represent, in this case, that which is not there? Now, all words do this, right? When I say a word, I am invoking the presence of something that is absent. If I say a pen, unless I actually have a pen present, I'm invoking the presence of the pen despite the fact that the pen is not actually present. So all words do that, but how would you do that in a written system? To invoke the presence of something that has no physical existence, that has a supernatural existence only. Well, you can't use an ideographic or a logographic system easily for that, because especially in an ideographic system, you can't draw out a picture of God that you can draw. Anything that you draw is going to have its root in something concrete that we can actually see. Now, you could represent the word God, but if you did so, then you would have to represent it in an iconic way, which would turn it then into a potential idol for us to worship itself. And so when you get to an alphabetical way of thinking and an alphabetical way of writing, then we can turn God into an extremely abstract principle. So, unsurprisingly, the Hebrew people were exposed to an alphabetical system by the Midianite people, and they are one of the first, if not only, group to create a monotheistic religion. That God is an abstract entity that we do not see, that we do not have access to, and that we can no longer represent in a visual way. Because obviously if you have a sun god, you can represent that with an icon of a sun. If you have a thunder god, you can represent that with an icon of a thunder. But you can't represent the Judeo-Christian monotheistic God in that way. And so if you ask anybody to describe God today, we would use very abstract, unsurprisingly, words to describe him. We would say that he is invisible. We would say he's omnipotent, omniscient. We would say that he's supernatural. These are all abstract words. They don't have any concrete grounding in reality. We can't see omniscient. We can't see omnipotent. We can't see invisibility. We can't see the supernatural. So where the Hebrew people really built something really cool is this idea right here, that if you're going to have a God that is invisible, that cannot be represented in a physical form, in an idolatry form, then you have to have a medium that corresponds to that message. You have to have an abstract way of writing to mimic the abstract way of thinking, to mimic the abstract thinking about God. And as you move forward through the history of Christianity, then you get some really interesting ideas, such as that Jesus becomes the Word in John 1:1, and that God speaks frequently throughout the Bible, but he never appears physically, except in that moment when Moses sees him and sees the back of God, or sees him in the burning bush. So Logan's fundamental idea is this: of all the people whose writing system directly descended from the Proto-Canaanite alphabet, the Hebrews were the most influenced by the alphabet effect. They became the people of the book, who expressed their culture almost exclusively through the written word, and hence the alphabet. So let's sum up. So the way that we can tie all of these ideas we've been talking about together is to recognize that the medium is the message, which means that we're studying a rhetorical understanding of existence, which means that we're looking at the way the information is presented as opposed to the actual content of that information. Now we can do that on very small examples like when people are talking or people are doing PowerPoint presentations, but we can also do that on a much more abstract scale when we're talking about writing systems, and specifically how those writing systems impact big picture things like the development of Western thought or the development of a monotheistic religion. And so this process of moving from this form of writing to that form of writing mimics the way that we think, moving from a concrete way of thinking to an abstract way of thinking, which then finds its fruition in things like the Judeo-Christian religion. Now, I should make one final caveat here. Logan is not arguing for a causal and effect relationship. He's not saying that the alphabet created God, but rather that the alphabet allowed for the development of the Judeo-Christian faith, which would not have happened otherwise. You cannot have a monotheistic God that is similar to the Judeo-Christian God unless you have the alphabet. So the medium then provides the mechanism, the clay, the ecology, the environment for that message. So that's the last lecture on thinking theoretically about writing in technology. So we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.